Chapter 4. In other parts of the world, wrote Wilbur Larch, there is society. Here in Street Clouds we have no society, and there are no options. That's why an orphan is eager to become a member of any society. Wilbur Larch was thinking of Homer Wells when he wrote about options. Homer had no choice concerning his apprenticeship. What else could he learn if he didn't learn obstetrical procedure? By 194, Homer Wells, who was not yet 20 years old, had delivered many children himself, with Dr. Larch always present, but Larch had not allowed Homer to perform an abortion. It was understood by both Larch and Homer that Homer was able to perform one, but Larch believed that Homer should complete medical school, a real medical school, and serve an internship in another hospital before he performed the abortion. The operation was not complicated, but Larch believed that it should be Homer's choice. Larch thought that Homer should know something of society before he made the decision, by himself, whether to perform abortions or not. Wilbur Larch loved Homer Wells. He had never loved anyone as he loved that boy, and he could not imagine his own life at Street Clouds without Homer. But the doctor knew that Homer Wells had to encounter with society if the boy was going to choose his life. Larch dreamed that Homer would go out in the world and then choose to come back to Street Clouds. But who would choose such a thing? Maine had many towns, but there wasn't a place as charmless as Street Clouds. East of Cape Kenneth, the tourist trap, there was a pretty harbor town, the town of Heart's Haven. To the west of Heart's Haven there was another small town, the town of Heart's Rock. The people of Heart's Haven didn't like Heart's Rock, nearby Drinkwater Lake, and the summer cottages on its muddy shores. The lake was the only place where people from Heart's Rock could spend the summer. The summer camps and cottages on the lakeshore were also used during the hunting season weekends in the fall. The lake was dirty. People didn't drink the water of Drinkwater Lake, and there were many jokes on that subject in Heart's Haven. Not all of Heart's Rock was so ugly. It was a town on quite open, neatly farmed land. It was fruit-tree country. There were beautiful orchards. In 194, Ocean View Orchards, a big apple farm, on Drinkwater Road, which connected Heart's Rock to Heart's Haven, was pretty and plentiful. The farmhouse had patios, there were rose bushes, the lawns spreading from the main house to the swimming pool were beautiful. The owner of Ocean View Orchards, Wallace Worthington, was from New York. He was not good at farming, but he knew almost everything about money and had hired the right people to run Ocean View. They were the men who really knew apples. Worthington was a constant board member at the Haven Club. He was the only Heart's Rock resident who was a Haven Club member. Wallace Worthington employed half of the local people of Heart's Rock to work in his orchard, so he was loved in both towns. Wallace would remind Wilbur Larch of someone who he met at the Channing Peabody's, where Dr. Larch went to perform his second abortion, the rich people's abortion, as Larch thought of it. To Homer Wells, Wallace Worthington would look like a real king of New England. Wallace Worthington's wife, Olive, looked like a queen, but she had come from a miserable part of town. Olive Worthington grew up selling clams out of the back of a pickup truck. Her mother smoked a lot and died of lung cancer when Olive was still in high school. Cheerful Wallace Worthington was generous and kind. He adored Olive and everything about her, her gray eyes and her ash blonde hair, and her new British accent, which she had learned at college. Her brother, who was very successful as a well digger, had paid for Olive's education, and that was the reason why she tolerated his visits at Ocean View Orchards, when he walked around the house in his muddy boots. Wallace Worthington was a real gentleman. He was very kind to his workers. He provided them with health insurance policies at his expense. But there was one problem: he seemed drunk all the time, so everyone in Heart's Haven and in Heart's Rock agreed that it was not easy to live with him. Yet no one doubted that Wallace Worthington was faithful to Olive. They had a son, who was 20 and 194. The young man was as big and handsome and charming as his father, with his mother's gray eyes. He even had a bit of her new British accent. Wallace Worthington, Jr., was called Wally. From the day of Wally's birth, Wallace Worthington was called Senior by everyone. If Dr. Larch spent some time around Senior Worthington, Larch might understand that the man was unfairly judged. Of course, he drank too much. But Senior was not a drunk. He had the classic, clinical symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, which were failure of memory, restlessness, hyperactivity and defective judgment. But the townspeople didn't know the difference between drunkenness and Alzheimer's disease. They misjudged Olive Worthington, too. She knew how to work. She saw, instantly, that Wallace Worthington was good about money but wasn't an expert in apples, and so she decided to help him. She found out who the knowledgeable foremen were and she paid them more money. She fired the others, and hired a younger, more reliable crew. She baked apple pies for the families of the workers who pleased her, and she taught their wives the recipe, too. She went to the university and learned how to plant a new tree orchard. She learned more about the new chemicals than the foreman knew, and then she taught them. She took the farm out of Senior's careless hands, and she ran it very intelligently for him. There are things that the societies of towns know about you, and things that they don't see. Senior Worthington was puzzled by his own state. He also thought that it was the result of the evils of drink. When he drank less, and still couldn't remember in the morning what he'd said or done the evening before, still hopped from one activity to the next, leaving a jacket in one place, a hat in another, his car keys in the lost jacket. When he drank less and still behaved like a fool, this confused him so much that he began to drink more. He was a victim of both Alzheimer's disease and alcoholism. In this one respect, Heart's Haven and Heart's Rock were like street clouds. Nothing could save Senior Worthington from what was wrong with him, and nothing could save Fuzzy Stone. In 193, Homer Wells began Gray's Anatomy. At the beginning, he began with a skeleton. He began with bones. In 194, he was making his third journey through Gray's Anatomy. Heart is a hollow muscular organ of conical form, enclosed in the cavity of the pericardium. Homer Wells could recite from Gray's Anatomy. By 194 Homer had looked at each of the hearts in the 3 dead bodies, or cadavers, that Dr. Larch had gotten for him. The cadavers were female, which was necessary in the process of educating Homer Wells in obstetrical procedure. There was always a problem getting a body. Homer remembered the 3 cadavers very well. By the time he got the 3rd body, he had developed enough of a sense of humor to give the body a name. He called her Clara after David Copperfield's mother, that poor, weak woman who was tyrannized by the terrible Mr. Murdstone. Body number 2 gave Homer the essential practice that prepared him for his first cesarean section. When Dr. Larch was at the railroad station arguing with the station master about the documents for the unfortunate Clara, Homer Wells was at Street Cloud studying body number 2. He was going to consult his Grays, but just then, Nurse Edna rushed into the room with a scream. "Oh, Homer!" she cried, but she couldn't speak. Finally, she pointed Homer in the direction of the dispensary. He ran there as quickly as he could, and found a woman lying on the dispensary floor. Her eyes were staring wildly. Then the woman began to move, her face, which had been flushed, turned a shiny blue-black, her heels struck the floor with such force that both her shoes flew off. Her mouth and chin were wet with froth. "Eclampsia," Homer Wells said to Nurse Edna. "Dr. Larch is at the railroad station," Homer told Nurse Edna calmly. "Someone has to call him. You and Nurse Angela should stay to help me." When Nurse Edna returned to the delivery room with Nurse Angela, Homer instructed the nurses to give morphine to the patient. Homer himself injected some magnesium sulfate into a vein, to lower blood pressure at least temporarily. In the interval between her last and her next convulsion, he told Nurse Edna and Nurse Angela to take the necessary tests. He asked the woman how many convulsions she had already suffered, but she couldn't remember the number of convulsions. She only remembered their beginnings and their after effects. She also said she was expecting her baby in a month. The woman's state was very dangerous. At the start of her next convulsion, Homer gave the woman a little ether, hoping to help her. But it didn't work, though the woman's motion was slower. In the next interval, while the woman was still relaxed under the ether sedation, Homer examined the woman. Labor hadn't begun. He was afraid to make the decision to start the operation. He wondered why Dr. Larch didn't come. An orphan had been told to find Larch at the railroad station. The boy returned and announced that Dr. Larch had boarded the train to 3 Mile Falls, in order to follow the dead body that the station master had forwarded to the next stop. The station master had simply refused to accept the cadaver. Larch, in a rage, had taken the next train after it. "Oh, Nurse Edna said." Homer gave his patient her first dose of digitalis, which helped prevent the development of fluid in the lungs. While he waited with the woman for her next fit, he asked her if this was a baby that she wanted very much, or one that she didn't want. "Do you mean it's going to die?" the woman asked. "Of course not," Homer said, and smiled like Dr. Larch. But he thought that the baby would die if he didn't deliver it soon, and the woman would die if he rushed the delivery. The woman said that she didn't want to keep the baby, but that she wanted the baby to live. "Right," Homer said. "You look very young," the woman said. "I'm not going to die, am I?" she asked. "No, you're not," said Homer Wells, using Dr. Larch's smile again. But in 12 hours, when the woman was suffering her 7th fit on the operating table, Homer Wells did not smile. He looked at Nurse Angela, who was trying to help him hold the woman, and he said, "I'm going to start her labor." "I'm sure you know what's best, Homer," Nurse Angela said. 12 more hours passed, the contractions started. Homer Wells could never remember the exact number of convulsions the woman had in that time. He was beginning to worry more about Dr. Larch than about the woman, and he had to fight with his fear in order to concentrate on his job. 10 hours later a boy was born, in good condition. The mother felt better very soon. There were no more fits, and her blood pressure returned to normal. In the evening, Wilbur Larch, together with the rescued cadaver, soon called Clara, returned tired and triumphant to Street Clouds. He had followed the body to 3 Mile Falls, but the station master there had been so frightened that the body was not unloaded from the train. It had traveled further, and Larch had traveled after it, arriving at the next, and at the next station. No one wanted Clara. And so Clara went from 3 Mile Falls to Misery Gore, to Moxie Gore, to East Moxie, and so on. Larch had a terrible row with the station master in Harmony, Maine, where Clara had scared everyone before she had been sent further. "That was my body," Larch screamed. It is for a student of medicine who is training with me in my hospital in St. Cloud's. It's mine. Larch yelled. Why are you sending it in the wrong direction? Why are you sending it away from me? It came here, didn't it? The station master said. It wasn't taken at St. Cloud's. The station master in St. Cloud's is crazy. Larch shouted. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't, said the station master in harmony. All I know is, the body came here and I sent it on. Idiots! Larch shouted, and took the train. In Cornville, where the train didn't stop, Wilbur Larch screamed out the window at a couple of potato farmers who were waving at the train, "Maine is full of morons." In Skowhegan, he asked the station master where the body was going. Bath, I suppose, the Skowhegan station master said. It came from Bath, and if nobody wants it at the other end, it's going back to Bath. I want it! Screamed Wilbur Larch. The body had been sent to the hospital in St. Cloud's from the hospital in Bath. A woman had died there, and the pathologist at Bath Memorial Hospital knew that Wilbur Larch was looking for a fresh female. Dr. Larch caught Clara in Augusta, where the station master simply saw that the body was going the wrong way. Of course it's going the wrong way! Wilbur Larch cried. The station master was surprised. Don't they speak English there? They don't hear English. Larch yelled. On the long ride back to St. Cloud's with Clara, Dr. Larch didn't calm down. In each of the towns that offended him, he offered his opinions to the station masters while the train paused at the stations. Marineville, he told the station master in harmony. Tell me one thing which is harmonious here, one thing. Marineville. Larch shouted out the window as the train pulled away. Idiotsburg. To his great disappointment, when the train arrived in St. Cloud's, the station master was not there. He's having lunch, someone told Dr. Larch, but it was early evening. Do you mean supper? Dr. Larch asked. Perhaps the station master doesn't know the difference, he said unkindly. He hired 2 men to bring Clara to the boys' division. He was surprised by the disorder in which Homer Wells had left body number 2. Larch went shouting through the orphanage, looking for Homer. Here I am, running after new body for you, and you leave a mess like that. Homer! Dr. Larch yelled. God damn it, he muttered to himself, a teenager can't become an adult soon, a teenager can't accept adult responsibilities, he can't do an adult's job. He went muttering all over the boys' division, looking for Homer Wells, but Homer had been on Larch's bed in the dispensary and had fallen into the deepest sleep. He had been awake for nearly 40 hours with the patient, delivering her and her child. Nurse Angela stopped Dr. Larch before he could find Homer Wells and wake him up. "What's happening around here?" Larch wanted to know. "Is no one interested in where I've been? And why has that boy left the body looking like a war casualty?" And Nurse Angela told him everything. "Homer did this?" Larch asked Nurse Angela and Nurse Edna. He was reading the report. He had examined the mother, who was fine, and the baby boy, who was normal and healthy. "He was almost as calm as you, Wilbur," Nurse Edna said. "You can be proud of him." "He is an angel, in my opinion," Nurse Angela said. "He did everything just right," Nurse Edna added. "He was as sure as snow," Nurse Angela said. "He did almost everything right," Wilbur Larch was thinking. It was amazing. Larch thought that it was a small error that Homer hadn't recorded the exact number of convulsions during the childbirth. It was minor criticism. But Wilbur Larch was a good teacher. Homer Wells had performed all the hard parts correctly. His procedure has been perfect. "He's not even 20, is he?" Larch asked. But Nurse Edna had gone to bed. She was exhausted. Nurse Angela was still awake, in her office, and when Dr. Larch asked her why the baby had not been named, she told Larch that it was Nurse Edna's turn and Nurse Edna had been too tired. "Well, it doesn't matter," said Wilbur Larch. "You name it, then." But Nurse Angela had a better idea. It was Homer's baby. He had saved it, and the mother. "Homer Wells should name this one," Nurse Angela said. "Yes, you're right, he should," Dr. Larch replied, filling with pride in his wonderful creation. He had slept almost through the night. He woke only once on the dispensary bed. Larch was in the room probably looking at him, but Homer kept his eyes closed. He felt that Larch was there because of the sweet scent of ether, and because of Larch's breathing. Then he felt Larch's hand, passing very lightly over his forehead. Homer Wells, not yet 20 years old and as knowledgeable as almost any doctor, lay very still, pretending to sleep. Dr. Larch bent over him and kissed him, very lightly, on his lips. Homer heard Larch whisper, "Good work, Homer." He felt a second, even lighter kiss. "Good work, my boy," the doctor said, and then left him. Homer Wells felt his tears coming silently. He cried more than the last time when Fuzzy Stone had died and Homer had lied about Fuzzy to Snowy and the others. He cried and cried, but he didn't make a sound. He cried because he had received his first fatherly kisses. Of course, Melanie had kissed him, Nurse Edna and Nurse Angela had kissed him, but they kissed everyone. Dr. Larch had never kissed him before, and now he had kissed him twice. Homer Wells cried because he'd never known how nice a father's kisses could be. Dr. Larch went to look at the eclampsia patient and at her tiny child. Then Larch went to the familiar typewriter in Nurse Angela's office, but he couldn't write anything. "Oh God," thought Wilbur Larch, "what will happen to me when Homer has to go?" The next day Homer Wells gave names to body number 3 and his first orphan. He named the new body Clara, and the baby boy David Copperfield. It was an easy decision. Young Wally Worthington thought that he'd been in love twice before he was 20 years old, and once when he was 21. Now, in 194 he was just 3 years older than Homer Wells. Wally fell deeply in love for the 4th time. He didn't know that this time would be for life. The girl, whom Wally loved, was a lobsterman's daughter. Her father, Raymond Kendall, wasn't an ordinary lobsterman, he was the best lobsterman. Other lobstermen watched him through binoculars. When he changed his mooring lines, they changed theirs. When he didn't go to sea but stayed at home, other lobstermen stayed home, too. But they couldn't match him. He was not just an artist with lobster, he also was an expert at fixing things, at keeping everything that anyone else would throw away. Raymond Kendall didn't like to introduce himself as a lobsterman, he was prouder of his qualities as a mechanic. There was a rumor that Kendall had more money than Senior Worthington. There was almost no evidence of his spending any, except on his daughter. Like the children of the Haven Club members, she went to a private boarding school, and Raymond Kendall paid a lot for a Haven Club membership. Not for himself, he went to the club only on request, to fix things, but for his daughter, who'd learned to swim in the heated pool there, and who'd taken her tennis lessons on the same courts visited by young Wally Worthington. Kendall's daughter had her own car, too. It looked out of place in the Haven Club parking lot. It was a mishmash of the parts from other cars. It had a Ford symbol on its hood and a Chrysler emblem on the trunk, and the passenger side door was sealed completely shut. However, its battery never went dead in the Haven Club lot. Some of Raymond Kendall's fabulous money was paid him as salary by Olive Worthington, in addition to his lobstering. Ray Kendall looked after the vehicles and machinery of the Ocean View orchards. Olive Worthington paid him a full foreman's salary because he knew almost as much about apples as he knew about lobsters, and he was the best farms mechanic, but Ray refused to work more than 2 hours a day. Despite the fact that Ray Kendall worked 2 hours every day at Ocean View, he was never seen to eat an apple. His beautiful daughter, Candace, or Candy, was named after her mother, who had died in childbirth. She was a great and natural beauty, She was at once friendly and practical, she was well-mannered and energetic. Everyone liked her. Even Olive Worthington liked her, and Olive was suspicious of the girls who went out with Wally. She questioned what they wanted from him. She was afraid of girls who were more interested in the Ocean View life than they were interested in Wally. Olive knew that Candy wasn't looking for money. In truth, Olive Worthington thought that Candy Kendall might be too good for her son. In her own bedroom, Candy kept the picture of her mother when her mother had been Candy's age. She looked just like Candy. The picture was taken the summer she met Trey, an older boy, strong and determined to fix everything. Candy had her mother's blondness, it was darker than Wally's blondness. She had her father's dark skin and dark brown eyes, and her father's height. Ray Kendall was a tall man. Candy Kendall and Wally Worthington fell in love with each other in the summer of 1994. Everyone in Hearts Haven and in Hearts Rock thought that they were perfect for each other. Even grumpy Raymond Kendall approved. Ray thought that Wally wasn't lazy, and he could see that the boy was good-hearted. Ray also approved of Wally's mother. And Candy thought that Olive Worthington would be a perfect mother-in-law. It was understood that Wally would finish college first, and that Candy would finish college before they got married. However, there were possible causes for a change of plans. After all, it was 1994, there was a war in Europe, there were many people who thought that America would be involved soon. But Olive had a mother's wish to keep war out of her mind. Wilbur Larch had the war in Europe very much in his mind. He had been in the last war, and he foresaw that if there was another war, Homer Well could go to the army. But the good doctor had already taken some steps to save Homer Wells from going to a war. Larch was, after all, the historian of street clouds. He wrote the only records that were kept there. He wrote fiction, too. In the case of Fuzzy Stone and in the other, very few cases of orphans who had died, Wilbur Larch hadn't liked the actual endings of those small lives. Wasn't it fair if Larch invented happy endings? In the case of the few who had died, Wilbur Larch made up a longer life for them. For example, the history of F. Stone was like the history that Wilbur Larch wished for Homer Wells. After Fuzzy's most successful adoption, every member of the adoptive family was scrupulously described, and successful treatment and cure of Fuzzy's respiratory disease. The young man got an education at Bowdoin College, Wilbur Larch's own alma mater, and then studied medicine at Harvard Medical School, following Larch's footsteps to internships at the Boston Lying-In. Larch intended to make a devoted and skilled obstetrician out of Fuzzy Stone. The orphan's fictional history was as carefully done as everything Wilbur Larch did. He had also made a slight modification in the history of Homer Wells. He was very pleased with himself for this slight fiction that he had so skillfully blended with the actual history of Homer Wells. Wilbur Larch had written about Homer Wells that the boy had a heart defect, a heart that was damaged and weakened from birth. Larch was thinking of war, the so-called war in Europe. Larch, and many others, feared that the war wouldn't stay there. "I'm sorry, Homer," Larch imagined telling the boy. "I don't want to worry you, but you have a bad heart, it just wouldn't stand up to a war." In fact, the doctor's own heart would never stand up to Homer Wells's going to war. In an earlier entry in the file on Homer Wells, an entry that Dr. Larch removed, he had written, "I love nothing or no one as much as I love Homer Wells." Thus, Wilbur Larch was more prepared for how a war could change important plans than Olive Worthington was prepared for it. The other and more probable cause for a change in the wedding plans of her son and Candy Kendall, had been foreseen by Olive. It was an unwanted pregnancy. But it was not foreseen by either Candy or Wally. Thus, when Candy got pregnant, she and Wally were much upset, but they were also surprised. They simply couldn't believe it. They were not ashamed or unable to tell their parents, they were simply shocked by the prospect of destroying their perfect plans. "We're not ready, are we?" Candy said to Wally. "Do you feel ready?" "I love you," Wally said. He was a brave boy, and true, and Candy loved him, too. "But it's just not the right time for us, is it, Wally?" Candy asked him. "I want to marry you, anytime," he said truthfully, but he added something that she hadn't thought of. He had thought of the war in Europe. He said, "What if there's a war?" "What if what?" said Candy, truly shocked. "I mean, if we were at war, I'd go," Wally said. "Only, if there was a child, I couldn't go to a war." "When would it be right to go to a war, Wally?" Candy asked him. "Well, I mean, I'd just have to go, that's all, if we had a war," he said. "I mean, it's our country and besides, for the experience, I couldn't miss it." She slapped his face and started to cry, in a rage. "For the experience? You'd want to go to war for the experience?" "Well, not if we had a child," Wally said. "What about me?" Candy asked, "With or without a child, what would it be like for me if you went to a war?" "Well, it's all what if, isn't it?" Wally asked. "It's just something to think about," he added. "I think we should try not to have the baby," Candy told him. "But we need a real doctor," Wally said. "Of course," she agreed. "But are there any real doctors who do it?" "I haven't heard of them," Wally admitted. but Wally Worthington hoped to get advice about an abortionist. He knew that the orchardmen at Ocean View liked him and that they could be trusted to keep Wally's secret. He went first to the only bachelor on the orchard crew, supposing that bachelors might have more use for abortionists than married men. Wally approached a member of the apple crew named Herb Fowler, a man only a few years older than Wally. Herb Fowler's present girlfriend was younger than Herb, just a local girl, about Candy's age. Her name was Louise Toby, and the men called her Squeeze Louise, which was okay with Herb. It was said that he had other girlfriends, and he always carried lots of condoms, at all times of the day and night, and when anyone said anything about sex, Herb Fowler reached into his pocket for a rubber and threw it at the speaker. He usually said, "Do you see these? They keep a man free." Wally had already had several rubbers thrown at him, and he was tired of the joke, but he thought that Herb Fowler was the right sort of man to ask. "Hey, Herb," Wally said to him. "Yes, that's my name," Herb said. "Herb," Wally said. "If a girl is pregnant, what should one do about it?" Herb Fowler disappointed Wally. All he knew was something suspicious about a butcher, and $500. "Maybe Meanie Hyde knows about it," Herb added. "Why don't you ask Meanie?" Herb Fowler smiled at Wally. Meanie Hyde was a nice man. He'd grown up with a lot of older brothers who beat him. His brothers called him Meanie, probably just to confuse him. Meanie was friendly, he had a friendly wife, Florence. There had been so many children that Wally couldn't remember all their names, or tell one from the other. And so he didn't think that Meanie Hyde even knew what an abortion was. "Meanie listens to everything," Herb Fowler told Wally. So Wally went to find Meanie Hyde. Meanie was waxing the pressboards for the cider press. Wally watched Meanie Hyde waxing. "Say, Meanie," Wally said, after a while. "I thought that you forgot my name," Meanie said cheerfully. "Meanie, what do you know about abortion?" Wally asked. "I know it's a sin," Meanie Hyde said, "and I know that Grace Lynch has had an abortion, and in her case, I sympathize with her, if you know what I mean." Grace Lynch was Vernon Lynch's wife. Wally, and everyone else, knew that Vernon beat her. They had no children. "Who needs an abortion, Wally?" Meanie Hyde asked. "A friend of a friend," Wally said. "That's a shame, Wally," Meanie said. "I think you should speak to Grace about it, just don't speak to her when Vernon's around. And don't tell Grace I told you to ask her." So Wally went looking for Grace Lynch. Grace was cleaning one of the shelves of the pie oven when Wally found her. He startled her. and Grace made a little cry and banged one of her elbows against the oven. "I am sorry that I scared you, Grace," Wally said. "I've got a problem." She stared at him as if this news frightened her more than anything anyone had ever told her. She looked quickly away and said, "I'm cleaning the oven." Wally suddenly realized that all his secrets were entirely safe with Grace Lynch. "Candy is pregnant," Wally said. She looked at Wally again with her eyes as round as a rabbit's. "I need advice." "Please just tell me what you know, Grace," Wally said. "St. Cloud's," she whispered. Wally thought that it was someone's name, the name of a saint? Or was it a nickname for an evil abortionist, Street Clouds? "I don't know the doctor's name," Grace said, not looking at Wally. "The place is called St. Cloud's, and the doctor's good," she whispered. "But don't let her go alone, okay, Wally?" Grace said. "No, I won't let her go alone, of course," Wally promised her. "You will ask for the orphanage when you get off the train," Grace said. She climbed back in the oven before he could thank her. Grace Lynch had gone to Street Clouds alone. Vernon hadn't even known she was going. Grace had arrived in the early evening, just after dark. She'd been so nervous that Dr. Larch's sedation had not affected her very much and she'd been awake during the night. There had been no complications. There had never been any serious complications following any abortion Dr. Larch had ever performed. But still Grace Lynch hated to think of Street Clouds. It was because of the atmosphere of the place in the long night she'd stayed awake. The disturbed river smelled like death, the cries of the babies were frightening, there was a sound of a machine, the typewriter. That night Wally sat on Ray Kendall's dock with Candy and told her what he knew about Street Clouds. "I knew it was an orphanage," Candy said. "That's all I knew." It was clear to them both that they couldn't explain their absence during the night, so Wally arranged to borrow Senior's Cadillac, so that they could leave very early in the morning and return in the evening of the same day. Wally told Senior it was the best time of year to explore the coast. "I know it's a workday," Wally told Olive. "But it's only one day off, Mom. It's just to have a little journey with Candy." Ray Kendall knew that Candy would be happy to take a drive with Wally. Wally was a good driver, and the Cadillac was a safe car. The night before their trip, Candy and Wally went to bed early, but each of them was awake through the night. Wally worried that an abortion would make Candy unhappy or even uncomfortable with sex. Candy wondered if Wally would love her after all this was over. That same night Wilbur Larch and Homer Wells weren't sleeping either. Larch sat at the typewriter in Nurse Angela's office. Through the window, he saw Homer Wells walking around outside, with an oil lamp in the darkness. "What is the matter now?" Larch wondered, and went to see what Homer was doing. "I couldn't sleep," Homer told Larch. "What is it this time?" Dr. Larch asked Homer. "Maybe it's just an owl," said Homer Wells. The wind was strong, which was unusual for street clouds. When the wind blew out the lamp, the doctor and his assistant saw the light shining from the window of Nurse Angela's office. It was the only light for miles around, and it made their shadows gigantic. Larch's shadow reached the black woods. Homer Wells's shadow touched the dark sky. Only then, both men noticed, Homer had grown taller than Dr. Larch. Larch spread his arms so that his shadow looked like a magician. Larch flapped his arms like a big bat. "Look," he said to Homer. "I'm a wizard." Homer Wells, the wizard's apprentice, flapped his arms, too. The wind was very strong and fresh. The stars shone bright and cold. "Feel that wind," said Homer Wells. "Maybe the wind didn't let them sleep." "It's a wind coming from the coast," Wilbur Larch said. It was a rare sea breeze, Larch was sure. "Wherever it's from, it's nice," Homer Wells decided. Both men stood sniffing the wind. Each man thought, "What is going to happen to me?"